Free from Fins. Chapter 3. Bree, Topsy, and Minta found Daniel by a large panel window overlooking the sea. After the fight he had with his father, he needed time to himself, and he had always found the ocean a source of inner peace. Not to mention he'd have to endure a ball, which meant socializing to the point where he was dead inside. When he heard the three coming, he turned to see who it was. He had been expecting a messenger or a butler to remind him about the ball. Instead, he was left with a gaping mouth. He lost track of his manners as he stood there in awe of Bree's appearance. He had thought his mother looked dazzling in that dress, but with violet eyes that matched its hue, Bree made the dress impressive in a different way. The girls curtsied, and Topsy grinned from cheek to cheek, nudging her grandmother. She clearly saw the spark between Daniel and Bree. Minta just sighed and said nothing to Topsy. "You look ready for the ball," Daniel commented, looking lastly at Bree, but then he saw the confusion on her face. "You don't know what a ball is, do you? Okay, let me put it this way, it's a dance." Still nothing. "Wow, all right then. I suppose this should be exciting for you." A servant came up to the group and coughed politely. They all looked toward him, waiting for him to speak. "Your guests have arrived. Dinner will be served during the closing of the ball since the cooks are having some trouble." "Thank you, we'll be right out," Minta said, taking Bree's hand gently. It was her attempt to stop a wild romance. As the servant left, Daniel took his sister's hand and asked, "Ready to go face our subjects?" Topsy held her chin up with her back straightened. "Yes, brother, that would be a wonderful idea." The two went first to the ballroom. Bree and Minta followed after them, staying in the shadows even though they hadn't even entered the room yet. Bree didn't mind staying in the shadows, she just wanted to see what they meant by dancing. Bree's eyes lit up when they walked in behind Daniel and Topsy. It was beautiful. As merfolk, the only thing that came close to the room was the spaces used for musical performances, but that was so small compared to this. Glossy tiles covered the floor and scents of flowers filled the air. And though it was dark outside, the room glimmered thanks to the many candles all around. Then there was the energy of the room as a massive amount of humans roamed the floor. She wanted to explore it all. The people bowed gracefully when they saw Daniel and Topsy enter. This meant the dance was going to begin, so the people began to find partners. In a set spot in the room, music was played with all kinds of instruments that looked similar to those merfolk played. Minta saw Bree's expression of amazement and asked, "Would you like to walk around and see everything?" Bree nodded as she bit her thumb, trying to soak it all in. Daniel watched with Topsy as Minta and Bree went their way around the huge room crowded with people. Minta explained everything to Bree as they walked. She told her about the dancing and how there were all sorts of different steps in each dance. Then she went to explain the crazy hairstyles some of the women wore. Bree was mostly curious about the thing called wigs. Heading back to where they first began, they bumped into Minta's son, who of course was the king. Bree bowed as she did to her own father back at home. Minta, however, didn't even nod. She didn't see the need to bow to her son. To her, she was still higher in the ranks than he was. "So this is the girl?" They weren't lying about her hair. "What is her name, Minta?" Minta crossed her arms. "Is that how you address your own mother?" A son never calls his mother by her first name. "And her name is Bree. You better remember it." "I will, mother, and Bree is a lovely name." "If you will, I need your sage advice on something," he said without giving a glance to Bree at all. Then he left with Minta to attend to serious matters. Bree decided to observe the dancing, which she found quite entertaining. She loved how the dresses flowed and opened like flowers when the women were twirled and lifted. Such things as dresses weren't needed for a mermaid. The only thing that mattered was voice and obedience. Simple things for some, but that didn't include Bree. She was getting many marks down for sticking her head out of the water. She didn't want to think what the punishment was for attending a ball with humans and for being one herself. The music ended and the dancing pairs stopped. They bowed to one another with respect. It was such an amazing thing to witness people get along so well. Merfolk always seemed to be jealous of someone. Bree was actually in that group of jealous people, as much as she hated to say it. Someone coughed behind Bree. She turned around to Daniel's smiling face. The first human face she had ever seen. "Hello, Bree. I couldn't help but see how much all of this interests you. I was just wondering if perhaps, well, he put his hand on top of his head, nervous to ask even though he knew most girls would say yes in a heartbeat. All right, I just wanted to know if you would like to dance." Bree nodded happily. She had been wanting to try, but it didn't appear to be something she could do on her own. Daniel cooled himself off a little and took Bree's hand. The first thing he noticed was how soft it was, but again, he told himself Bree wasn't a mermaid. There was no possible way. He couldn't let Topsy's wild ideas give him false hope. The two went to the middle of the room along with many other pairs. It was at this moment, Bree realized that perhaps the human world wasn't so different from hers. Young women whispered to each other, concealing their envious remarks behind their decorated fans as their eyes bored into the back of Bree's head. The music began and Daniel led Bree in the dance. She grew flustered and spent most of her time looking down at their feet. Daniel smiled as he lifted her chin. Their eyes met. Bree smiled likewise, but with her eyebrows raised, asking what the matter was. You have to be confident when dancing, plus it makes it less awkward. Much easier talking to someone when they aren't looking down at their feet. Bree nodded, then she made a swirling motion with her hand. If she was going to be watched, she might as well put on a show and enjoy the moment. Daniel understood her gesture and twirled Bree just as some of the other men were doing. He brought her back in to only spin her out again to her delight. After that, he lifted her and dropped her back down. Her hair bounced, her smile got bigger, and her eyes got brighter. They continued the joyful dance, dismissing the judgment passed between the onlookers. Topsy stared at the pair from her seat with both hands resting on her cheeks. She hoped Minta was seeing this. They were perfect, and why shouldn't they be, Topsy thought. Daniel spun and lifted Bree several times. She became just as graceful as anyone else by that point. Finally, he spun her out and the dance ended. They bowed to one another. As the next song began, Bree gave Daniel a pleading look. He felt there was no way he could say no, and he didn't want to anyway, so he bowed to her again and took her waist. Bree put her hand on his shoulder and they went off. When Daniel's father and grandmother came back, they were both surprised to see them dancing. Daniel's father was more displeased. They were having trouble with Amishi, and his son dancing with a mute was not helping in any way. He might as well be courting a mermaid, but that's exactly what was happening. Daniel's father crossed his arms and said to Minta, "I can't wait until the princess of Amishi arrives. We'll be much better off once she is." Minta pulled her son's ear. "They are just dancing. Just because Amishi thinks that mute girls are impure doesn't mean we have to." The proud king looked around the room to make sure no one was watching them. Thankfully it appeared that no one had seen. He rubbed his ear. You would have thought that he learned better with his mother always there to guide him. Of course, she was always there because he was a buffoon. Daniel and Bree kept dancing, and it was the first time Daniel didn't feel forced to be there. Topsy watched from her seat happily as she kicked her legs whenever she knew her father and grandmother weren't looking. The king watched while strolling around the room, a bit agitated. Minta also observed the two with mixed emotions as she made her way to her granddaughter. She was happy to see them joyful, but she still distrusted Bree. It was hard to look past that Bree was a siren, but Minta wanted to be optimistic about the future just as her grandchildren were. The last dance was announced. It was a fast-paced dance that never let you stand still. Daniel loved these kinds partly because it was different and connected royal dance to common dance. Daniel took Bree's hand and waist and galloped to the beat of the music. When they were far from other couples, he spun her quickly in and right back out. Then they came together and galloped once again. This time, when there was room, he lifted her for a few seconds. The real fun of it was that they could laugh at themselves for making so many mistakes that only they, as a pair, knew about. No other kingdom did this dance, and it was a shame. When the dance ended, dinner was proclaimed ready. Daniel, breathing fast from all the skipping, held a hand out to Bree. Bree took it, her smile plastered to her face. They found their seats at the head table. Daniel helped Bree into hers, which he found was a little far from where he would and must sit. No doubt the work of his father. Dinner began and Bree was excited to taste everything they served her. She watched others eat first, so she didn't end up doing something ridiculous like combing her hair with one of the strange things humans use to eat. That's something her sisters would have done. When she felt ready, she began to eat the salad that was laid before her. It tasted much better than any of the healthy food she had to eat under the sea. It was crunchy and had juicy bites of tomatoes. Next, she ate some chicken, which she cut into small chunks like the ladies around her. As she put it in her mouth, she smiled and put several more chunks in until she realized she was eating much too fast. Thankfully, the only person who was watching Bree eat was Daniel. For whatever reason, he enjoyed seeing her eat. He could tell it was her first time eating chicken, which made him sad. He could only think that she must not be very rich, yet he still had that sinking feeling that it was more than that. Again he pushed those thoughts aside and couldn't wait until they brought out the pudding. The servants came by to pick up the empty plates and to set a bowl of pudding at each spot. And upon sight, Bree couldn't wait to try the oddly shaped dish that jiggled. She picked up a spoon and took a little bit from the bowl to try it out. Daniel loved Bree's reaction. She ate the pudding slowly only to make sure she got the whole package. At times she would even close her eyes, thinking nothing could get more heavenly than this. Clink, clink, clink went the king's cup when he tapped on it with his spoon. He stood and said, "Thank you for joining us tonight. The next ball we have will be even bigger, seeing as my son, Prince Daniel, will be crowned king and hopefully, by that time, be happily married. As for now, we celebrate his return and our recent prize from the struggling war we are facing with the dreaded sirens. Plug your ears if you wish to be safe. Bring her in." The back doors opened and everyone's eyes widened. 2 men carried a mermaid inside a clear container. They set the container where everyone could see. Inside, the mermaid didn't make a peep, she only cried and didn't look toward anyone. Bree tried not to panic, but she couldn't stop herself from beginning to breathe rapidly. The mermaid wasn't just any mermaid, it was her sister, Camille. Her beautiful sister with blonde hair and pink highlights. Her older sister, who was always there for her. Topsy and Minta didn't stare long at Camille but looked at Bree. They saw her expression and knew something had to be done. It wouldn't end well if Bree stood up for the mermaid. Everyone would then put two and two together. Camille looked up from her crying as she heard the king's footsteps. During her glance, she saw Bree sitting there. Camille put her hand to her mouth and put it on the side of the container. She thought she was going to die. Bree couldn't have this. She was about to move when Daniel did it for her. He jumped in front of his father. "Wait, before you do anything irrational, you should study the details. We can bring peace. This is what I've been waiting for. To find the truth." Daniel's father laughed. "You think I'll let you talk to a mermaid?" Minta got between them. "Then don't let him. Free the mermaid back into the sea. It works for both of you. Maybe that way the mermaid will spread the news of being freed by humans." The king looked around at his subjects. They all seemed to be nodding, agreeing that it wasn't a bad choice to make. He finally agreed. Bree slowed down her breathing again when they took her sister out of the room, which would then go to the seashore for her release. After that, the king dismissed the crowd and went straight for his room. Daniel followed behind, knowing his father would want to speak with him. It would just be his father yelling again, but he was prepared for it. He gave Bree a sad smile before he went out the doors. Minta and Topsy came over to Bree. "Come," Minta said, taking Bree's hand. They walked to one of the spare rooms, which would be Bree's for the night. Topsy closed the doors behind them while Minta sat Bree down on the bed of warm fur. Topsy then hopped up beside them and started playing with Bree's hair. No one knew what to say. Finally, Bree spoke. "Thank you for helping save her. It so happens that the mermaid they caught was my dear sister. I can only imagine she came because of me." Minta smiled. "I've never been a fan of your folk, but my grandchildren have gotten the better of me. Daniel is the one to thank." Bree smiled thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose he is." She came out of her dream, reminding herself romance was pointless, and stated, "I must find her on the shore, tell her about you and what I'm trying to do." "Let's go then," Topsy said, landing with a thud when she hit the floor. She took Bree's hand and started lifting Bree to her feet. Minta was about to protest both of them. It wasn't safe to go searching in the darkness. The biggest issue was that someone might put the pieces together if they saw them looking for the mermaid. Alas, Minta decided to let the girls have their freedom. All she did was tell them to be safe. The girls ran quietly to the beach. They didn't call for a carriage or want to cause any ruckus and wake others who were sleeping. Once at the beach, they searched the waters. "What's her name?" Topsy asked. "Camille," Bree said in a whisper. Together the girls shouted the name as loud as they dared. They walked along the shore. When Camille didn't appear, they grew weary, but that's when two guards came carrying the container with Camille inside some feet away. The girls hid and watched as the guards dumped Camille onto the sand, nowhere near the water. The guards then departed quickly in fear. Bree and Topsy ran to Camille in a hurry to rescue her from becoming too dried up. Camille gasped as they helped her into the water. It was then Camille could register who had helped her. "Bree," she exclaimed happily, but then she went to her older sister, voice that hinted at disappointment. "Why would you do this to us? Why would you become human? You need to come home." "No, Camille, you don't understand. I'm trying to prove that humans are good and there is no reason for war. You've seen two good humans yourself. And this," Bree pointed to Topsy, "is another amazing human. Besides, I can't go home even if I wanted to. I made a deal to get these legs. It cost my voice, and if I can't prove to Father humans are good, then it's my soul. Camille bit her lip. Can you ever stop and think before acting? Father's too blind to see humans are good. And remember, they captured me and killed others. I can't stay here, Bree. With that, Camille swam off before Bree could explain further. Bree sighed and Topsy hugged her. They stared out to the sea, hoping that her sister could possibly pop up out of the water again. That didn't happen. I didn't know you gave up your soul, Topsy finally said. I don't know if I would agree to that. Well, my sister is right about one thing. I'm reckless, Bree said with a smile. Behind them, they heard someone running in their direction through the sand. They turned to see Daniel. He sat down beside them, getting sand all over his black pants. Grandmother told me you'd be out here. I was actually thinking the same thing, to find the mermaid and talk to her. Bree remembered to be silent and gave him a warm smile. She'd have to leave the talking to Topsy. Well, we found her, but she didn't seem to be too happy about us capturing her in the first place. I don't think she's coming back, and we have no clue what she is going to tell everyone. Right, Daniel said glumly. All three of them didn't stir after that. They remained sitting and watching the waves. It was a peaceful sound that the waves made. Each of them could agree that they could have beautiful dreams if they slept by the beach right on the sand. After about 10 minutes, Daniel knew that they should get back to the castle. He didn't want anyone to think they had gone missing. For sure his father would blame it on Bree because that's what Amishi would do. Daniel stood and held his arm out to Bree. She took it and smiled gratefully. Then they helped Topsy up. Together they walked slowly along the beach until they were forced to move away from it. At least when they went to bed, they could still hear the waves crashing calmingly against the shore. As for Bree, she got the best sleep of her whole life since she never felt the comfort of soft beds and warm fur around her. She could enjoy being human and forget about the fact that she traded her soul, thanks to the sweet dreams she was having.